Relax and listen to the voice.
Welcome once again to the Fairy Tales of Hans Christian Andersen, Volume 17. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share our channel with your friends. And with that, here we go. On Judgment Day. The most solemn of all the days of our life is the day we die. It is Judgment Day, the great sacred day of transfiguration. Have you really, seriously given a fleeting thought to that grave and mighty last hour we shall spend on earth? There was once a man, a staunch upholder of truth, as he was called, to whom the word of God was law, a zealous servant of a zealous God. With a stern but heavenly look, the angel of death stood at his bedside. "The hour has come. You shall follow me," said Death, and touched the man's feet with ice-cold fingers, and his feet became like ice. Then Death touched his forehead, and lastly his heart. And when it burst, the soul was free to follow the angel of death. But during those brief seconds while the icy touch shivered through feet and head and heart, there passed through the mind of the dying man, like great ocean waves, the recollection of all he had wrought and felt throughout his life. So does one terrified glance into a whirlpool reveal in thought as swift as lightning the whole unfathomable depth of it. So with one fleeting glance at the countless stars of heaven, can one conceive the infinite multitude of worlds and spheres in the great universe? In such a moment, the terrified sinner shrinks into himself and has nothing to cling to, and he feels himself shrinking further into infinite emptiness. And at such times, the devout soul bows its head to the Almighty and yields itself up to Him in childlike trust, praying, "Thy will be done with me." But this dying man had not the mind of a child, nor was he a terrified sinner. His thoughts were of self-praise. He knew that he had abided by religious traditions. Millions, he knew, would have to face judgment, but he believed most confidently that his path would lead straight heavenward, and that mercy, promised to all men, would open the gates to him. And the soul followed the angel of death, casting only one wistful glance back at the bed where, in its white shroud, lay the lifeless image of clay, still bearing the print of the soul's individuality. Now they hovered through the air, now glided along the ground. Were they passing through a vast decorated hall, or perchance a forest? It was hard to tell. Nature appeared formally set out for show, as in the stately, artificial old French gardens, and through its strange, carefully arranged scenes there passed many men and women, all clad as if for a masquerade. "Such is human life," spoke the angel of death. It seemed as if the figures tried to disguise themselves. Those who flaunted the glories of velvet and gold were not always the noblest and the richest. Neither were all those who wore the garb of poverty the most wretched and vulgar. A strange masquerade indeed. And most strange of all was to see how each one carefully concealed under his clothing something he would not have the others discover. Each was determined to learn his neighbor's secret, and they tore at one another until here and there the heads of different animals were bared. One was that of a grinning ape, another the head of a goat, still others a clammy snake and a feeble fish. In all was some token of the animal which is fast rooted in human nature, and which here was struggling and jumping to burst forth. And however closely a person might hold his garment over to hide it, The others would never rest until they had torn aside the veil, and all kept crying out, "Look here! See! It is he! It is she!" And everyone mockingly laid bare his fellow's shame. "Then what was the animal in me?" inquired the soul. The angel of death silently pointed to a haughty form of whose head spread a bright glory of rays with shining colors, but in whose heart could be seen lurking half-hidden the feet of a peacock. The spreading glory above was merely the speckled tail of the peacock. As they passed on, huge birds shrieked horribly at them from the boughs of trees. In voices harsh but clear, intelligible and human, they cried, "You walk with death! Do you remember me?" All the evil thoughts and lusts that had lurked within the man from birth to death now called after him in forbidding tones, "Do you remember me?" For a moment the soul shuddered, for it recognized the voices. It could not deny knowledge of the evil thoughts and desires that were now rising as witnesses against it. "In our flesh, in our evil nature, nothing good lives," said the soul. "But, at least with me, thoughts never turned into action. The world has not seen their evil fruit." The soul rushed on to escape the ugly screams, but the huge black birds swept in circles, screaming out their vicious words, louder and louder, as though they wished to be heard to the ends of the world. The soul fled like a hunted stag, and at every step stumbled against sharp flint stones, painfully cutting his feet on them. "How came these sharp stones here? They seem like mere withered leaves lying on the ground." "Each stone is some careless word you have spoken, which wounded your neighbor's heart far more deeply than these sharp flints that now hurt your feet." "I never thought of that," cried the soul. "Judge not, that ye be not judged," rang through the air. In a moment, the soul recovered from its self-abasement. "We have all sinned, but I have kept the law and the gospel. I have done what I could do. I am not like the others." And then he stood at the gates of heaven itself, and the angel who guarded the entrance asked, "Who are you? Tell me your faith, and show it to me in your works." "I have faithfully kept all the commandments," replied the soul proudly. "I have humbled myself in the eyes of the world. I have hated and persecuted evil and those who practice it, and I would do so still, with fire and sword, had I yet the power." "Then you are a follower of Mohammed?" said the angel. "I never." "He who strikes with the sword shall perish by the sword," thus spoke the sun. "His religion you do not have. Are you then perchance one of the children of Israel, who with Moses said, 'An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth'?" "I am a Christian." "I see it neither in your faith nor in your actions. The teaching of Christ is forgiveness, love, and mercy." Mercy! The echo of this rang through infinite space. The gates of heaven opened, and the soul hovered toward the realms of eternal bliss. But the flood of light that streamed forth from within was so dazzling, so penetrating that the soul shrank back as from a double-edged sword. And the sound of music was so soft and touching that no mortal tongue could describe it. The soul trembled and prostrated itself lower and lower, and a celestial light cut through it until it felt as if it had never felt before the weight of its own pride and cruelty and sin. Whatever good I have done in the world, I did because I could not do otherwise. But the evil that I did, that was of myself. And more, the soul was dazzled and overwhelmed by the pure light of heaven. It seemed falling into a bottomless abyss, the abyss of its own nakedness and unworthiness, shrunk into itself, humbled, cast out, unfit for the kingdom of heaven, trembling at the thought of the just and holy God, hardly dared it to grasp mercy. And the angel of mercy came to him, the mercy he had not expected, and in the infinite space of heaven, God's everlasting love filled the soul. Holy, loving, glorious forever shalt thou be, O erring human spirit, sing the chorus of angels. And as this soul did, so shall we all, on our last day on earth, humbly tremble in the glorious sight of the kingdom of heaven. But the infinite love and mercy of our Heavenly Father will carry us through other spheres, so that, purified and strengthened, we may ascend into God's eternal light. There is no doubt about it.
That was a terrible affair,
said a hen, and in a quarter of the town, too, where it had not taken place.
That was a terrible affair in a hen roost. I cannot sleep alone tonight. It is a good thing that many of us sit on the roost together.
And then she told a story that made the feathers of the other hens bristle up and the cock's comb fall. There was no doubt about it. But we will begin at the beginning, and that is to be found in a hen roost in another part of the town. The sun was setting, and the fowls were flying on to their roost. One hen, with white feathers and short legs, used to lay her eggs according to the regulations, and was, as a hen, respectable in every way. As she was flying upon the roost, she plucked herself with her beak, and a little feather came out.
There it goes,
she said.
The more I pluck, the more beautiful do I get.
She said this merrily, for she was the best of the hens, and moreover, as had been said, very respectable. With that, she went to sleep. It was dark all around, and hen sat close to hen, but the one who sat nearest to her merry neighbor did not sleep. She had heard, and yet not heard, as we are often obliged to do in this world, in order to live at peace. But she could not keep it from her neighbor on the other side any longer.
Did you hear what was said? I mention no names, but there is a hen here who intends to pluck herself in order to look well. If I were a cock, I should despise her.
Just over the fowls sat the owl, with Father Owl and the little owls. The family has sharp ears, and they all heard every word that their neighbor had said. They rolled their eyes, and Mother Owl, beating her wings, said,
Don't listen to her, but I suppose you heard what was said. I heard it with my own ears, and one has to hear a great deal before they fall off. There is one among the fowls who has so far forgotten what is becoming to a hen that she plucks out all her feathers and lets the cock see it.
Prenez garde aux enfants, said the Father Owl. Children should not hear such things.
but I must tell our neighbor owl about it. She is such an estimable owl to talk to."
And with that, she flew away.
"Hoo, hoo!"
They both hooted into the neighbor's dovecot to the doves inside.
"Have you heard? Have you heard? Hoo! There is a hen who has plucked out all of her feathers for the sake of the cock. She will freeze to death if she is not frozen already. Hoo! Where?
Cooed the doves.
In the neighbor's yard. I have as good as seen it myself. It is almost unbecoming to tell the story, but there is no doubt about it. Believe every word of what we tell you,"
said the doves, and cooed down into their poultry yard.
"There is a hen, nay, some say that there are two, who have plucked out all their feathers in order not to look like the others and to attract the attention of the cock. It is a dangerous game, for one can easily catch cold and die from the fever, and both of these are dead already."
"Wake up! Wake up!" crowed the cock, and flew upon his board. Sleep was still in his eyes, but yet he crowed out. "3 hens have died of their unfortunate love for a cock. They had plucked out all of their feathers. It is a horrible story. I will not keep it to myself, but let it go farther."
"Let it go farther!"
shrieked the bats, and the hens clucked and the cocks crowed. "Let it go farther! Let it go farther!" In this way, the story traveled from poultry yard to poultry yard, and at last came back to the place from which it had really started. 5 hens, it now ran, have plucked out all of their feathers to show which of them had grown leanest for love of the cock, and then they all pecked at each other till the blood ran down and they fell down dead, to the derision and shame of their family, and to the great loss of their owner. The hen who had lost the loose little feather naturally did not recognize her own story, and being a respectable hen, said,
"I despise these fowls, but there are more of that kind. Such things ought not to be concealed, and I will do my best to get the story into the papers so that it becomes known throughout the land. The hens have richly deserved it, and their families too."
It got into the papers. It was printed, and there is no doubt about it. One little feather may easily grow into 5 hens. A Cheerful Temper. From my father I received the best inheritance, namely, a good temper. And who was my father? That has nothing to do with the good temper, but I will say he was lively, good-looking, round, and fat. He was both in appearance and character a complete contradiction to his profession. And pray, what was his profession and his standing in respectable society? Well, perhaps if in the beginning of a book these were written and printed, many, when they read it, would lay the book down and say, "It seems to me a very miserable title. I don't like things of this sort." And yet, my father was not a skin dresser nor an executioner. On the contrary, his employment placed him at the head of the grandest people of the town, and it was his place by right. He had to precede the bishop, and even the princes of the blood. He always went first. He was the hearse driver. Now, the truth is out, and I will own that when people saw my father perched up in front of the omnibus of death, dressed in his long, wide, black cloak, and his black-edged, three-cornered hat on his head, and then glanced at his round, jocund face, round as the sun, they could not think much of sorrow or the grave. That face said, "It is nothing. It will all end better than people think." So I have inherited from him not only my good temper, but a habit of going often to the churchyard, which is good when done in a proper humor, and then also I take in the Intelligencer, just as he used to do. I am not very young. I have neither wife nor children, nor a library, but as I said, I read the Intelligencer, which is enough for me. It is to me a delightful paper, and so it was to my father. It is of great use, for it contains all that a man requires to know. The names of the preachers at the church, and the new books which are published, where houses, servants, clothes, and provisions may be obtained. And then what a number of subscriptions to charities, and what innocent verses! Persons seeking interviews and engagements, all so plainly and naturally stated. Certainly, a man who takes in the Intelligencer may live merrily and be buried contentedly, and by the end of his life will have such a capital stock of paper that he can lie on a soft bed of it, unless he prefers wood shavings for his resting place. The newspaper and the churchyard were always exciting objects to me. My walks to the latter were like bathing places to my good humor. Everyone can read the newspaper for himself, but come with me to the churchyard while the sun shines and the trees are green, and let us wander among the graves. Each of them is like a closed book, with the back uppermost, on which we can read the title of what the book contains, but nothing more. I had a great deal of information from my father, and I have noticed a great deal myself. I keep it in my diary, in which I write for my own use and pleasure a history of all who lie here, and a few more beside. Now we are in the churchyard. Here, behind the white iron railings, once a rose tree grew. It is gone now, but a little bit of evergreen from a neighboring grave stretches out its green tendrils and makes some appearance. There rests a very unhappy man, and yet while he lived, he might be said to occupy a very good position. He had enough to live upon, and something to spare, but owing to his refined tastes, the least thing in the world annoyed him. If he went to a theater of an evening, instead of enjoying himself, he would be quite annoyed if the machinist had put too strong a light into one side of the moon, or if the representations of the sky hung over the scenes when they ought to have hung behind them, or if a palm tree was introduced into a scene representing the zoological gardens of Berlin, or a cactus in a view of Tyrol, or a beech tree in the north of Norway, as if these things were of any consequence. Why did he not leave them alone? Who would trouble themselves about such trifles, especially at a comedy, where everyone is expected to be amused? Then sometimes the public applauded too much or too little to please him.
"Oh, they are like wet wood,"
he would say, looking round to see what sort of people were present.
"This evening nothing fires them."
Then he would vex and fret himself because they did not laugh at the right time, or because they laughed in the wrong places, and so he fretted and worried himself, till at last the unhappy man fretted himself into the grave. Here rests a happy man, that is to say, a man of high birth and position, which was very lucky for him. Otherwise, he would have been scarcely worth notice. It is beautiful to observe how wisely nature orders these things. He walked about in a coat embroidered all over, and in the drawing rooms of society looked just like one of those rich, pearl-embroidered bell pulls, which are only made for show, and behind them always hangs a good thick cord for use. This man also had a stout, useful substitute behind him, who did duty for him, and performed all his dirty work. And there are still, even now, these serviceable cords behind other embroidered bell ropes. It is all so wisely arranged that a man may well be in good humor. Here rests, it makes one feel mournful to think of him. But there rests a man who, during 67 years, was never remembered to have said a good thing. He lived only in the hope of having a good idea. At last, he felt convinced, in his own mind, that he really had one, and was so delighted that he positively died of joy at the thought of having at last caught an idea. Nobody got anything by it. Indeed, no one even heard what the good thing was. Now I can imagine that this same idea may prevent him from resting quietly in his grave, for suppose that, to produce a good effect, it is necessary to bring out his new idea at breakfast, and that he can only make his appearance on earth at midnight, as ghosts are believed generally to do. When then this good idea would not suit the hour, and the man would have to carry it down again with him into the grave, that must be a troubled grave. The woman who lies here was so remarkably stingy that during her life she would get up in the night and mew, that her neighbors might think she kept a cat. What a miser she was! Here rests a young lady of a good family who would always make her voice heard in society, and when she sang "Mi manca la voce," it was the only true thing she ever said in her life. Here lies a maiden of another description. She was engaged to be married, but her story is one of everyday life. We will leave her to rest in the grave. Here rests a widow who, with music in her tongue, carried gall in her heart. She used to go round among the families near and search out their faults, upon which she preyed with all the envy and malice of her nature. This is a family grave. The members of this family held so firmly together in their opinions that they would believe in no other. If the newspapers, or even the whole world, said of a certain subject, "It is so-and-so," and a little schoolboy declared he had learned quite differently, they would take his assertion as the only true one, because he belonged to the family. And it is well known that if the yard cock belonging to this family happened to crow at midnight, they would declare it was morning, although the watchmen and all the clocks in the town were proclaiming the hour of 12 at night. The great poet Goethe concludes his Faust with the words, "May be continued." So might our wanderings in the churchyard be continued. I come here often, and if any of my friends, or those who are not my friends, are too much for me, I go out and choose a plot of ground in which to bury him or her. Then I bury them, as it were. There they lie, dead and powerless, till they come back new and better characters. Their lives and their deeds, looked at after my own fashion, I write down in my diary, as everyone ought to do. Then, if any of our friends act absurdly, no one need to be vexed about it. Let them bury the offenders out of sight, and keep their good temper. They can also read the Intelligencer, which is a paper written by the people, with their hands guided. When the time comes for the history of my life to be bound by the grave, then they will write it as my epitaph, "The man with a cheerful temper." and this is my story. A Great Grief. This story really consists of two parts. The first part might be left out, but it gives us a few particulars, and these are useful. We were staying in the country at a gentleman's seat, where it happened that the master was absent for a few days. In the meantime, there arrived from the next town a lady. She had a pug dog with her, and came, she said, to dispose of shares in her tan yard. She had her papers with her, and we advised her to put them in an envelope, and to write thereon the address of the proprietor of the estate, General War Commissary Knight and Co. She listened to us attentively, seized the pen, paused, and begged us to repeat the directions slowly. We complied, and she wrote, but in the midst of the general war, she struck fast, sighed deeply, and said,
"I am only a woman."
Her puggy had seated itself on the ground while she wrote, and growled, for the dog had come with her for amusement and for the sake of its health, and then the bare floor ought not to be offered to a visitor. His outward appearance was characterized by a snub nose and a very fat back.
"He doesn't bite,"
said the lady.
"He has no teeth. He is like one of the family, faithful and grumpy, but the latter is my grandchildren's fault, for they have teased him. They play at wedding, and want to give him the part of the bridesmaid, and that's too much for him, poor old fellow."
And she delivered her papers, and took Puggy upon her arm. And this is the first part of the story, which might have been left out. Puggy died. That's the second part. It was about a week afterwards we arrived in the town and put up at the inn. Our windows looked into the tan yard, which was divided into two parts by a partition of planks. In one half were many skins and hides, raw and tanned. Here was all the apparatus necessary to carry on a tannery, and it belonged to the widow. Puggy had died in the morning, and was to be buried in this part of the yard. The grandchildren of the widow, that is, the tanner's widow, for Puggy had never been married, filled up the grave, and it was a beautiful grave. It must have been quite pleasant to lie there. The grave was bordered with pieces of flower pots and strewn over with sand. Quite at the top, they had stuck up half a beer bottle with the neck upwards, and that was not at all allegorical. The children danced round the grave, and the eldest of the boys among them, a practical youngster of 7 years, made the proposition that there should be an exhibition of Puggy's burial place for all who lived in the lane. The price of admission was to be a trouser button, for every boy would be sure to have one, and each might also give one for a little girl. The proposal was adopted by acclamation, and all the children out of the lane, yes, even out of the little lane at the back, flocked to the place, and each gave a button. Many were noticed to go about on that afternoon with only one suspender, but then they had seen Puggy's grave, and the sight was worth much more. But in front of the tan yard, close to the entrance, stood a little girl clothed in rags, very pretty to look at, with curly hair and eyes so blue and clear that it was a pleasure to look into them. The child said not a word, nor did she cry, but each time the little door was opened, she gave a long, long look into the yard. She had not a button, that she knew right well, and therefore she remained standing sorrowfully outside till all the others had seen the grave and had gone away. Then she sat down, held her little brown hands before her eyes, and burst into tears. This girl alone had not seen Puggy's grave. It was a grief as great to her as any grown person can experience. We saw this from above and looked at from above how many a grief of our own and of others can make us smile. That is the story, and whoever does not understand it may go and purchase a share in the tan yard from the widow. Everything in the right place. It is more than 100 years ago. At the border of the wood, near a large lake, stood the old mansion. Deep ditches surrounded it on every side, in which reeds and bulrushes grew. Close by the drawbridge, near the gate, there was an old willow tree which bent over the reeds. From the narrow pass came the sound of bugles and the trampling of horses' feet. Therefore, a little girl who was watching the geese hastened to drive them away from the bridge before the whole hunting party came galloping up. They came, however, so quickly that the girl, in order to avoid being run over, placed herself on one of the high cornerstones of the bridge. She was still half a child and very delicately built. She had bright blue eyes and a gentle, sweet expression. But such things the Baron did not notice while he was riding past the little goose girl. He reversed his hunting crop, and in rough play gave her such a push with it that she fell backwards into the ditch. "Everything in the right place!" he cried. "Into the ditch with you!" Then he burst out laughing, for that he called fun. The others joined in. The whole party shouted and cried, while the hounds barked. While the poor girl was falling, she happily caught one of the branches of the willow tree, by the help of which she held herself over the water, and as soon as the Baron with his company and the dogs had disappeared through the gate, the girl endeavored to scramble up, but the branch broke off, and she would have fallen backwards among the rushes had not a strong hand from above seized her at that moment. It was the hand of a peddler. He had witnessed what had happened from a short distance, and now hastened to assist her. "Everything in the right place," he said, imitating the noble Baron, and pulling the little maid up to the dry ground. He wished to put the branch back in the place it had been broken off, but it is not possible to put everything in the right place. Therefore, he stuck the branch into the soft ground. "Grow and thrive if you can, and produce a good flute for them yonder at the mansion," he said. It would have given him great pleasure to see the noble Baron and his companions well thrashed. Then he entered the castle, but not the banqueting hall. He was too humble for that. No, he went to the servants' hall. The men servants and the maids looked over his stock of articles and bargained with him. Loud crying and screaming were heard from the master's table above. They called it singing. Indeed, they did their best. Laughter and the howl of dogs were heard through the open windows. There they were feasting and reveling. Wine and strong old ale were foaming in the glasses and jugs. The favorite dogs ate with their masters. Now and then the squires kissed one of these animals, after having wiped its mouth first with the tablecloth. They ordered the peddler to come up, but only to make fun of him. The wine had got into their heads, and reason had left them. They poured beer into a stocking that he could drink with them, but quick. That's what they called fun, and it made them laugh. Then meadows, peasants, and farmyards were staked on one card and lost.
Everything in the right place,
the peddler said, when he had at last safely got out of Sodom and Gomorrah, as he called it.
The open high road is my right place. Up there I did not feel at ease.
The little maid, who was still watching the geese, nodded kindly to him as he passed through the gate. Days and weeks passed, and it was seen that the broken willow branch which the peddler had stuck into the ground near the ditch remained fresh and green. Nay, it even put forth fresh twigs. The little goose girl saw that the branch had taken root and was very pleased. The tree, so she said, was now her tree. While the tree was advancing, everything else at the castle was going backward, through feasting and gambling, for these are two rollers upon which nobody stands safely. Less than 6 years afterwards, the Baron passed out of his castle gate a poor beggar, while the baronial seat had been bought by a rich tradesman. He was the very peddler they had made fun of and poured beer into a stocking for him to drink. But honesty and industry brought one forward, and now the peddler was the possessor of the baronial estate. From that time forward, no card-playing was permitted there.
That's a bad pastime, he said. When the devil saw the Bible for the first time, he wanted to produce a caricature in opposition to it, and invented card-playing.
The new proprietor of the estate took a wife, and whom did he take? The little goose girl, who had always remained good and kind, and who looked as beautiful in her new clothes as if she had been a lady of high birth. And how did all this come about? That would be too long a tale to tell in our busy time, but it really happened, and the most important events have yet to be told. It was pleasant and cheerful to live in the old place now. The mother superintended the household, and the father looked after things out of doors, and they were indeed very prosperous. Where honesty leads the way, prosperity is sure to follow. The old mansion was repaired and painted, the ditches were cleaned, and fruit trees planted. All was homely and pleasant, and the floors were as white and shining as a pasteboard. In their long winter evenings, the mistress and her maids sat at the spinning wheel in the large hall. Every Sunday the counselor, this title the peddler had obtained, although only in his old days, read aloud from a portion of the Bible. The children, for they had children, all received the best education, but they were not equally clever, as is the case in all families. In the meantime, the willow tree near the drawbridge had grown up into a splendid tree, and stood there, free, and was never clipped. "It is our genealogical tree," said the old people to their children, "and therefore it must be honored." 100 years had elapsed. It was in our own days. The lake had been transformed into marshland. The whole baronial seat had, as it were, disappeared. A pool of water near some ruined walls was the only remainder of the deep ditches, and here stood a magnificent old tree with overhanging branches. That was the genealogical tree. Here it stood, and showed how beautiful a willow can look if one does not interfere with it. The trunk, it is true, was cleft in the middle from the root to the crown. The storms had bent it a little, but it still stood there, and out of every crevice and cleft, in which wind and weather had carried mold, blades of grass and flowers sprang forth. Especially above, where the large boughs parted, there was quite a hanging garden, in which wild raspberries and hart's-tongue ferns throve, and even a little mistletoe had taken root and grew gracefully in the old willow branches, which were reflected in the dark water beneath when the wind blew the chickweed into the corner of the pool. A footpath which led across the fields passed close by the old tree. High up on the woody hillside stood the new mansion. It had a splendid view and was large and magnificent. Its window panes were so clear that one might have thought there were none there at all. The large flight of steps which led to the entrance looked like a bower covered with roses and broad-leaved plants. The lawn was as green as if each blade of grass was cleaned separately morning and evening. Inside, in the hall, valuable oil paintings were hanging on the walls. Here stood chairs and sofas covered with silk and velvet, which could be easily rolled about on casters. There were tables with polished marble tops, and books bound in morocco with gilt edges. Indeed, well-to-do and distinguished people lived here. It was the dwelling of the Baron and his family. Each article was in keeping with its surroundings. Everything in the right place was the motto according to which they also acted here, and therefore all the paintings which had once been the honor and glory of the old mansion were now hung up in the passage which led to the servants' rooms. It was all old lumber, especially two portraits, one representing a man in a scarlet coat with a wig, and the other a lady with powdered and curled hair holding a rose in her hand, each of them being surrounded by a large wreath of willow branches. Both portraits had many holes in them, because the Baron's sons used the two old people as targets for their crossbows. They represented the counselor and his wife, from whom the whole family descended.
"But they did not properly belong to our family," said one of the boys. "He was a peddler, and she kept the geese. They were not like Papa and Mama."
The portraits were old lumber, and everything in its right place. That was why the great-grandparents had been hung up in the passage leading to the servants' rooms. The son of the village pastor was tutor at the mansion. One day he went for a walk across the fields with his young pupils and their elder sister, who had lately been confirmed. They walked along the road which passed by the old willow tree, and while they were on the road, she picked a bunch of field flowers. Everything in the right place, and indeed the bunch looked very beautiful. At the same time, she listened to all that was said, and she very much liked to hear the pastor's son speak about the elements and the great men and women in history. She had a healthy mind, noble in thought and deed, and with a heart full of love for everything that God had created. They stopped at the old willow tree, as the youngest of the Baron's sons wished very much to have a flute from it, such as had been cut off for him from the other willow trees. The pastor's son broke a branch off.
"Oh, pray do not do it,"
said the young lady, but it was already done.
"That is our famous old tree. I love it very much. They often laugh at me at home about it, but that does not matter. There is a story attached to this tree."
And now she told him all that we already know about the tree. The old mansion, the peddler and the goose girl who had met there for the first time and had become the ancestors of the noble family to which the young lady belonged.
"They did not like to be knighted, the good old people,"
she said.
"Their motto was everything in the right place, and it would not be right, they thought, to purchase a title for money. My grandfather, the first Baron, was their son. They say he was a very learned man, a great favorite with the princes and princesses, and was invited to all the court festivities. The others at home loved him best, but I do not know why. There seemed to me to be something about the old couple that attracts my heart. How homely, how patriarchal it must have been in the old mansion, where the mistress sat at the spinning wheel with her maids, while her husband read aloud out of the Bible.
"They must have been excellent, sensible people," said the pastor's son. And with this, the conversation turned naturally to noblemen and commoners. From the manner in which the tutor spoke about the significance of being noble, it seemed almost as if he did not belong to a commoner's family.
It is good fortune to be of a family who have distinguished themselves, and to possess, as it were, a spur in oneself to advance to all that is good. It is a splendid thing to belong to a noble family whose name serves as a card of admission to the highest circles. Nobility is a distinction. It is a gold coin that bears the stamp of its own value. It is the fallacy of time, and many poets express it, to say that all that is noble is bad and stupid, and that, on the contrary, the lower one goes among the poor, the more brilliant virtues one finds. I do not share this opinion, or it is wrong. In the upper classes, one sees many touchingly beautiful traits. My own mother has told me of such, and I could mention several. One day she was visiting a nobleman's house in town. My grandmother, I believe, had been the lady's nurse when she was a child. My mother and the nobleman were alone in the room when he suddenly noticed an old woman on crutches come limping into the courtyard. She came every Sunday to carry a gift away with her. "Well, there is the poor old woman," said the nobleman. "It is so difficult for her to walk." My mother had hardly understood what he said before he disappeared from the room and went downstairs in order to save her the troublesome walk for the gift she came to fetch. Of course, this is only a little incident, but it has its good sound like the poor widow's two mites in the Bible, the sound which echoes in the depths of every human heart, and this is what the poet ought to show and point out. More especially in our own time, he ought to sing of this. It does good. It mitigates and reconciles. But when a man, simply because he is of noble birth and possesses a genealogy, stands on his hind legs and neighs in the street like an Arabian horse, and says when a commoner has been in a room, "Some people from the street have been here," their nobility is decaying. It has, at that point, become a mask of the kind that Thespis created, and it is amusing when such a person is exposed in satire.
Such was the tutor's speech. It was a little long, but while he delivered it, he had finished cutting the flute. There was a large party at the mansion. Many guests from the neighborhood and from the capital had arrived. There were ladies with tasteful and with tasteless dresses. The big hall was quite crowded with people. The clergymen stood humbly together in a corner and looked as if they were preparing for a funeral, but it was a festival. Only the amusement had not yet begun. A great concert was to take place, and that is why the young baron's son had brought his willow flute with him. But he could not make it sound, nor could his father, and therefore the flute was good for nothing. There was music and songs of the kind which delight most those that perform them, otherwise quite charming.
"Are you an artist?" said a cavalier, the son of his father. "You play on the flute. You have made it yourself. It is genius that rules. The place of honor is due to you."
"Certainly not. I only advance with the time, and that, of course, one can't help."
"I hope you will delight us all with the little instrument, will you not?"
Thus saying, he handed the tutor the flute, which had been cut from the willow tree by the pool, and then announced in a loud voice that the tutor wished to perform a solo on the flute. They wished to tease him, that was evident, and therefore the tutor declined to play, although he could do so very well. They urged and requested him, however, so long that at last he took up the flute and placed it to his lips. And that was a marvelous flute. Its sound was as thrilling as the whistle of a steam engine. In fact, it was much stronger, for it sounded and was heard in the yard, in the garden, in the wood, and many miles round in the country. At the same time a storm rose and roared, "Everything in the right place!" And with this, the Baron, as if carried by the wind, flew out of the hall straight into the shepherd's cottage, and the shepherd flew, not into the hall, thither he could not come, but into the servants' hall, among the smart footmen who were striding about in silk stockings. These haughty menials looked horror-struck that such a person ventured to sit at a table with them. But in the hall the Baron's daughter flew to the place of honor at the end of the table. She was worthy to sit there. The pastor's son had the seat next to her. The two sat there as if they were a bridal pair. An old count, belonging to one of the oldest families in the country, remained untouched in his place of honor. The flute was just, and it is one's duty to be so. The sharp-tongued cavalier who had caused the flute to be played, and who was the child of his parents, flew headlong into the fowl-house, but not he alone. The flute was heard at the distance of a mile, and strange events took place. A rich banker's family, who were driving in a coach and four, were blown out of it, and could not even find room behind it with their footmen. Two rich farmers, who had in our day shut up higher than their own cornfields, were flung into the ditch. It was a dangerous flute. Fortunately, it burst at the first sound, and that was a good thing, for then it was put back into its owner's pocket, its right place. The next day, nobody spoke a word about what had taken place. Thus originated the phrase, "to pocket the flute." Everything was again in its usual order, except that the two old pictures of the peddler and the goose girl were hanging in the banqueting hall. There they were on the wall as if blown up there, and as a real expert said that they were painted by a master's hand, they remained there and were restored. Everything in the right place, and to this it will come. Eternity is long, much longer indeed than this story. The Goblin and the Huckster. There was once a regular student who lived in a garret and had no possessions, and there was also a regular huckster to whom the house belonged and who occupied the ground floor. A goblin lived with the huckster because at Christmas he always had a large dish full of jam with a great piece of butter in the middle. The huckster could afford this, and therefore the goblin remained with the huckster, which was very cunning of him. One evening the student came into the shop through the back door to buy candles and cheese for himself. He had no one to send, and therefore he came himself. He obtained what he wished, and then the huckster and his wife nodded good evening to him. And she was a woman who could do more than merely nod, for she usually had plenty to say for herself. The student nodded in return as he turned to leave, then suddenly stopped and began reading the piece of paper in which the cheese was wrapped. It was a leaf torn out of an old book, a book that ought not to have been torn up, for it was full of poetry.
"Yonder lies some more of the same sort," said the huckster. "I gave an old woman a few coffee berries for it. You shall have the rest for 6 pence, if you will."
"Indeed I will," said the student. "Give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread and butter without cheese. It would be a sin to tear up a book like this. You are a clever man and a practical man, but you understand no more about poetry than that cask yonder."
This was a very rude speech, especially against the cask, but the huckster and the student both laughed, for it was only said in fun. But the goblin felt very angry that any man should venture to say such things to a huckster who was a householder and sold the best butter. As soon as it was night, and the shop closed, and everyone in bed except the student, the goblin stepped softly into the bedroom where the huckster's wife slept, and took away her tongue, which of course she did not then want. Whatever object in the room he placed his tongue upon immediately received voice and speech, and was able to express its thoughts and feelings as readily as the lady herself could do. It could only be used by one object at a time, which was a good thing, as a number speaking at once would have caused great confusion. The goblin laid the tongue upon the cask, in which lay a quantity of old newspapers.
"Is it really true,"
he asked,
"that you do not know what poetry is?"
"Of course I know,"
replied the cask.
"Poetry is something that always stands in the corner of a newspaper and is sometimes cut out, and I may venture to affirm that I have more of it in me than the student has, and I am only a poor tub of the huckster's."
Then the goblin placed the tongue on the coffee mill, and how it did go, to be sure. Then he put it on the butter tub and the cash box, and they all expressed the same opinion as the wastepaper tub, and a majority must always be respected.
"Now I shall go and tell the student,"
said the goblin, and with these words he went quietly up the back stairs to the garret where the student lived. He had a candle burning still, and the goblin peeped through the keyhole and saw that he was reading in a torn book which he had brought out of the shop. But how light the room was! From the book shot forth a ray of light which grew broad and full, like the stem of a tree, from which bright rays spread upward and over the student's head. Each leaf was fresh, and each flower was like a beautiful female head, some with dark and sparkling eyes, and others with eyes that were wonderfully blue and clear. The fruit gleamed like stars, and the room was filled with sounds of beautiful music. The little goblin had never imagined, much less seen or heard of, any sight so glorious as this. He stood still on tiptoe, peeping in, till the light went out in the garret. The student no doubt had blown out his candle and gone to bed, but the little goblin remained standing there nevertheless, and listening to the music which still sounded on, soft and beautiful, a sweet cradle song for the student who had laid down to rest.
"This is a wonderful place,"
said the goblin.
I never expected such a thing. I should like to stay here with the student."
And the little man thought it over, for he was a sensible little spirit. At last he sighed.
"But the student has no jam."
So he went downstairs again to the huckster's shop, and it was a good thing he got back when he did, for the cask had almost worn out the lady's tongue. He had given a description of all that he contained on one side, and was just about to turn himself over to the other side to describe what was there, when the goblin entered and restored the tongue to the lady. But from that time forward, the whole shop, from the cash box down to the pine wood logs, formed their opinions from that of the cask. And they all had such confidence in him, and treated him with so much respect, that when the huckster read the criticisms on theatricals and art of an evening, they fancied it must all come from the cask. But after what he had seen, the goblin could no longer sit and listen quietly to the wisdom and understanding downstairs. So, as soon as the evening light glimmered in the garret, he took courage, for it seemed to him as if the rays of light were strong cables, drawing him up and obliging him to go and peep through the keyhole. And, while there, a feeling of vastness came over him, such as we experienced by the ever-moving sea when the storm breaks forth, and it brought tears into his eyes. He did not himself know why he wept, yet a kind of pleasant feeling mingled with his tears.
"How wonderfully glorious it would be to sit with the student under such a tree!"
But that was out of the question. He must be content to look through the keyhole, and be thankful for even that. There he stood on the old landing, with the autumn wind blowing down upon him through the trap-door. It was very cold, but the little creature did not really feel it, till the light in the garret went out, and the tones of music died away. Then how he shivered, and crept downstairs again to his warm corner, where it felt like home and comfortable. And when Christmas came again, and brought the dish of jam and a great lump of butter, he liked the huckster best of all. Soon after, in the middle of the night, the goblin was awoke by a terrible noise and knocking against the window shutters and the house doors, and by the sound of the watchman's horn, for a great fire had broken out, and the whole street appeared full of flames. Was it in their house or a neighbor's? No one could tell, for terror had seized upon all. The huckster's wife was so bewildered that she took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket, that she might save something at least. The huckster ran to get his business papers, and the servant resolved to save her blue silk mantle, which she had managed to buy. Each wished to keep the best things they had. The goblin had the same wish, for, with one spring, he was upstairs and in the student's room, whom he found standing by the open window and looking quite calmly at the fire which was raging at the house of a neighbor opposite. The goblin caught up the wonderful book which lay on the table and popped it into his red cap, which he held tightly with both hands. The greatest treasure in the house was saved, and he ran away with it to the roof and seated himself on the chimney. The flames of the burning house opposite illuminated him as he sat, both hands pressed tightly over his cap, in which the treasure lay. And then he found out what feelings really reigned in his heart, and knew exactly which way they tended. And yet, when the fire was extinguished, and the goblin again began to reflect, he hesitated, and said at last,
"I must divide myself between the two. I cannot quite give up the huckster because of the jam."
And this
is a representation of human nature. We are all like the goblin. We all go to visit the huckster because of the jam. Thank you one and all, dear listeners, for tuning in to yet another episode of the Fairy Tales of Hans Christian Andersen. This was volume 17. That means we have roughly over 17 hours worth of fairy tales from the collection of Hans Christian Andersen already logged into our channel. Feel free to listen to them all. Hans Christian Andersen was one of the great masters of storytelling, and we highly recommend indulging yourself in his work. Please like the videos, remember to subscribe to the channel, and until next time, take care of yourselves and have sweet dreams.